which really lit a fire in me that was a tiny little flame into a huge raging fire, burning desire to do my very best, my highest quality work for a man I had yet to meet, but could feel his presence everywhere I was within the company.
Welcome to The Art of Quality, the podcast that explores the lived experience of guests who have a deep familiarity with quality in the domains of business, entrepreneurship, investing, and the arts. By sharing stories about how master practitioners experience their lives' work, we hope to inspire others who are seeking to bring more quality into their lives. Today, we are joined by Teresa Noonan. Teresa worked at Costco for 32 years and played a key role in leadership development and supply chain optimization. Today, she runs a consulting firm doing exactly that, which is called Lot Number 68. In our conversation, Teresa shares incredible stories on the quality of Costco's People's First culture, which from day one really ignited what she called a fire in her belly, and that led her through an astonishing decade-long career. She was instrumental in creating what Costco is well known for today, which is creating win-win setups with every stakeholder involved. And I think after listening to this podcast, you will have a better idea of what ingredients the secret sauce of a wildly successful business like Costco may be. We're your hosts, William, Paul, Ferdinand, and John. We are excited to share this conversation with you. Enjoy.
It is my great pleasure, dear listeners, to introduce our guest today. Our guest is Teresa Noonan. Teresa has spent over 3 decades working within the organization known as Costco, today one of the largest retailers in the world, founded by very famous human being in the quality company, great business, great company world. Jim Sinegal is a legendary figure, and Teresa had the chance throughout her career to spend some time with Jim. So we're very excited to learn a little about what that was like. So Teresa, to dive right in, tell us about the first time you met Jim.
So it's interesting because I met Jim, not the human being standing before me. I met Jim when I was first hired with the company and what he personified. And that was something so different from any environment I'd ever worked in. In that, I felt honored as an individual. I felt appreciated and respected for my contributions, which really lit a fire in me that was a tiny little flame into a huge raging fire, burning desire to do my very best, my highest quality work for a company, to be excited every day and find joy in working with the other employees that embodied this, and for a man I had yet to meet, but could feel his presence everywhere I was within the company. I started in Anchorage, Alaska in a warehouse. When I began in 1988, there were about 11 warehouses. It was a small, considerably smaller than it is today. I would say it was a nice, successful company, of course. Any one warehouse would make some people feel like that a huge, successful company. But I had managers thanking me at the end of the day for the work I had done for that day. I had managers approaching me during my workday, complimenting my work and showing me appreciation and coming alongside me to contribute to the work that needed to be done for the day. That made me feel like certainly they were due the respect they'd earned, but I also felt that they were human and approachable. And this is something that Jim cultivated within his company, even as it grew, as long as he was at the helm as the CEO. I want to tell a little story on Jim. When he decided to leave Saul and strike out on his own from San Diego to Seattle and was looking for other people to come alongside him and lead, they all decided who's going to be the CEO. So they put their names in an actual hat, and the name that got the most votes would become the CEO. And Jim got 2 votes because he voted for himself, and somebody else voted for him too. Therefore, he became the CEO. And that is truly the luck of the draw, right? So we all were the benefactors of him believing in himself so that he could demonstrate that not only believing in yourself was important and paramount, but believing in others is too. When I first met Jim live was a couple of years later. I had started with Costco while I was in college and thought this was my interim job while I got myself through college. And then once I graduated, I'd figure out what I wanted to do. Literally within 3 months, I realized this was the company I wanted to build my career in. I did not want to be in operations. I had my eyes set on going into buying, and I wanted to go to corporate, which was in Washington. So I went to my warehouse manager and told him my aspirations. And he immediately started looking at when are the people from corporate coming to tour the warehouses, because that's a regular thing. Jim believed in you have to be in the warehouses to understand the heartbeat of the company. And so he would start setting up interviews for me when these people were coming to tour. This is how much they believed in their employees and wanted to retain good talent and made you feel valuable. So he did that. So then I was invited to come to corporate, fly down and interview with a couple groups, which I did. And that's when I got to meet Jim personally, because his desk in his office was open air, and it was literally in a landing area above the staircase, above the cafe, where every employee traversed throughout the day to get from their desk to the front door or from their desk to and from the cafe. So there was no missing him. So I just went up and introduced myself, and he stopped what he was doing and shook my hand and stood up and had a chat with me, which was mind-blowing to me. I came from another retail environment that I'd worked out when I was 15, 16, and 17. And I rarely, if ever, even interacted with the store manager, let alone the CEO of that company. So it was just, it felt so open and inviting and available. So.
That's wonderful. And as you had this experience, it was inviting, it was inspiring. What were the stories that people would tell, I guess, in the couple of years before you met him? And around that time, what are the stories you remember people telling about him and what he cared about and how, I guess, his values were transmitted within the organization?
A couple of things he cared about that were key, and I still say them today. I still think them today, and I still act upon them today. And they are really 4 or 5 key statements that he brought to life. And one was, do what's right because it's right. And I want to explain that. We can all understand that, really, but let me just tell you how he personified that. That was making decisions to not further your own career, or making decisions to tell the truth and expose yourself for an error you'd made, and then having somebody partner with you to fix it. Because here's another thing, you can't manage a secret, right? And another thing he would say, and it was one of his slides he always put up, is you have to take the shit with the sugar. So it's like, you've got, be excited about successes, be excited about achievements. We should all celebrate those. but we're going to make mistakes. We're going to have hard times. We're going to have hard conversations. We're going to have hard negotiations. You can't shy away from that. You must embrace that, and you must find a way to create solutions. And he was always about that and making sure you had a partner in everything you did and making sure that you worked as a team to solve problems and that you celebrated as a team in successes. Because not one person, it might be one person's idea, but it takes a team to bring it to life. And another one was basically, if you don't get that your job is teaching, then you don't get your job. So he was, and this is kind of what I was saying before we went on microphone, is he believed in, if you've got to teach the principles of the company, not just the people part and the bedrock of why we value and honor people, but what is the business? And are we teaching this business so that you can promote this person and release them into being a teacher for the company and know that the message won't get lost? You know, you have to have your spidey senses and make sure this person gets the mission, and they're going to take the mission and they're going to propagate the mission.
When it came, what was your first experience, if you recall, of a hard choice that there was to make and the way in which these principles served you, whether it was you or anyone that you were working with in those earlier years?
Oh, there's so many. So let's see. I'll tell you that I was the first in my warehouse before I went to corporate. I'll tell you about a couple first that I was. For instance, at night when we worked in the warehouse, the crew was all male. They had never had a female on the floor working after hours. This shift began at midnight, working after hours in a closed warehouse with forklifts, and you've got blade where you're cutting boxes open and you're hand stacking and marking from one pallet with corrugated boxes with goods in those corrugated boxes to now open boxes that you've marked, and you're building a displayable pallet. There was no woman in this warehouse in particular in Anchorage, Alaska, which is very male dominant. It's usually like 3-to-1 men to women in that environment. I was the first hired. And I'll tell you, I came from Nordstrom, where I sold cosmetics. I started as a model and then sold cosmetics. And so it was a very glamorous, high heels, nails always done, dressed head to toe environment. So I'm told by somebody close to me, you should go check out this place called Costco. They're new in town when I came back to go to school. So I did. I'd never heard of them before. I'd never been in a warehouse. So I show up in what I would have worn if I were interviewing at Nordstrom. I have high heels on. I have on a suit that's a skirt. My nails are done. My hair is done. My makeup's done. I have everything completely finished. And I show up in the door and ask for the manager. And he didn't bat an eye. I thought, oh boy, this doesn't look like the environment I dressed for, but okay, here I am. I was very young at the time. And he set up an interview with me he talked to me, which was kind of just a really casual interview. He passed on my resume to the department that was hiring, which was night shift. And that manager called me in, asked me for an interview that same day. And so I turned around and wore what I had on because it was, no time to change. And we sat down and chatted, and he said, okay, can you start tonight? And I said, well, I got up this morning at like 7 a.m. So if I could have a day to turn my sleep schedule around, so maybe I can start tomorrow night instead, I would appreciate that. If you really need me tonight, I'll do it. No problem. And he's like, no, you can have a day. That's a really, that's a fine question to ask. So I start, and I had no idea that I was the only woman. I didn't dawn on me. So I worked for about 90 days. Then you get your 90-day review. And that manager sat me down and said, I just want you to know I was having productivity issues. I was having morale issues. And since I hired you, productivity has gone up 35%, because I'm going to be honest with you, none of these guys are going to get beat by you. And I could see that none of these guys were going to beat you. He said, and I just knew you had a fire in your belly when I met you. And he said, and morale has gone up because I hear you singing. I hear you talking to the other guys. I hear you encouraging people. And he said, so what do you think about getting into management? And this is my 90-day review. And so I said, well, I don't know, I need to think about it. So then, within that month, I told him that I loved the environment. I loved the company. I wanted to make my career here. And he said, then you need to go talk to the warehouse manager, which I did. And then that's when the warehouse manager started asking people who were coming on tour from corporate to meet me. And I started interviewing. I think I'd worked there about 18 months before I got a job and I moved to corporate and went into buying. And then from there, about 18 months later, I went to the GM vice president of that division and said, I would like to, and I know it's early and I know I haven't been here very long, but I'd like to start being considered for promotion. I want to make my career here. I feel like I learn very swiftly and I would like to contribute at a higher level. And so I got promoted within a very short period of time. So between 1988, when I started, and 1992, which is 4 years, I was already an assistant buyer at corporate.
I would love for you to tell us a bit more about the signals that you picked up on in the organization that led you to that conviction that it was a place you wanted to build a career.
The bedrock of all things that I've already talked about, in addition to that, which made it such a rich environment, was the open door policy, which made it possible to approach anybody at any level of leadership and just have a conversation. It felt very humanized. The entire environment was extremely flat and very humanized. And I made friends with my buyer, my assistant buyer. When I was an inventory control specialist, we used to go to one another's houses, hang out together, go to lunch. You just felt like everything was approachable. And so it made you feel like everything was possible. And, my GM vice president of the division and I just had a great camaraderie. And I really open up to environments like that, and authentic and an open person. If I feel like it's not an environment like that, I might be a little more guarded, but it didn't feel like I needed to be. So they were getting to know me as a human being too. And something in me interested them as much as something in them and the environment interested me. So it really was a relationship. And so in that, it's a safe relationship, right? It's one of those relationships where you feel like you can sit down and have a conversation, not only about business, but about something that might be going on in your life that might manifest itself in your being more quiet than normal or being more agitated than normal. And they want to know it and they want to hear it and they want to support you in it. It's the whole person environment.
And was that the first time you'd ever experienced that?
Absolutely. I'd never experienced that before. So I worked for Nordstrom. I also worked for a smaller enterprise. The owner who I worked directly for, he had 2 storefronts and a school where he taught. He was a salon. And so here I am in the beauty industry again, right? He had 2 salons and then he had a beauty school. And he was very, very hard on his employees, really rough. But I wasn't afraid of him. And so I felt like I had really authentic conversations. So I feel like there was an element in me because I was the only girl with 2 brothers. And so I was on motorcycles and horses and riding bikes in the dirt and everything, as well as getting dressed up, cleaned up, and being a girl. So I had no problem with all of those elements. And so tough male figures in my life were never intimidating to me. And so I think that that's something that not all women share. And I recognize that in myself. And I recognize that I am able to be successful, remain calm and sturdy in environments that might otherwise be intimidating.
At Costco, what were the signs that you got that you could trust people? And I know Paul is going to be quite excited to ask you some follow-up questions on this topic. Tell us about that experience or your experience with trust within the organization, how it manifested, how it showed up, and what it allowed you to get done.
So I feel like you could talk openly with your leadership, as long as you remain respectful, that you can't be belligerent and think that you're going to get anywhere. But as long as you remain respectful, but honest and earnest, and that this topic matters not just to me, but to the health of the company, they would listen. And they demonstrated their listening by sitting down and having a conversation and having eye contact and following up, going to address whatever the concern was and coming back and telling me it had been addressed and that they wanted to know if it persisted. Because what mattered, what I communicated and what their actions communicated was it mattered about the health of the work environment, and that it wasn't about punitive damages and pointing out someone's flaws. It was about cultivating good character and open-mindedness in every employee that contributed to the mission. And so if I, as an employee, approached it in that manner, and the manager who needed to address it in the environment, whether it be with another employee or a whole group or whatever the situation might have been, then everybody feels honored. Everybody feels like they're not being hunted down. This is actually a teaching opportunity, which is what Jim professes, teach, teach, teach. It's not just the principles of the business acumen, a sheet of paper and a pencil. It's why do we behave in a manner that's acceptable to the corporation and the mission itself? That was one of the fundamental bedrocks that he taught, was people first. He would, and I know this is getting off your question, but I think this is important to demonstrate. He would, during the downturns in the economy, a couple things. One, he would come to us in the buying team and say, I need the top 10 items people are putting in their baskets, and we're going to take the margin. So Costco has a margin cap of 13.9%. He's like, we're going to take the margin down to 5% because our members need it. The people need it. They need these goods, and this will help them stretch their dollar in their basket and fill their pantry and their refrigerators for themselves and their families. Bring to me those items, project for me those sales, and how much we're going to be contributing in a dollar cents to the good of the people that trust us by a membership to shop with us. Just so he would know, it didn't necessarily inform his decision that he wouldn't do it. It was just that he wanted to know it. And then he would have himself or the CFO tell the shareholders why the margin was leaner and what we were doing. And if the street, as we call it, would put pressure on him to not do that, he would basically tell them to pound sand. He's like, people first. We are not going to line the pockets of the wealthy on the backs of those who need us. We are going to be who we say we are, and our actions are going to follow our words. So those 10 items would turn into 20, 30, or 40 items, depending on how long those downturns persisted. And that was one of those things that I could really get behind. And no matter how wealthy I became, I just always believed in people first, because we're just only as strong and as good as the weakest link.
Teresa.
And that's how I taught my employees too, was we are only as strong as the weakest link. So if you see somebody weak, You have to underpin them. You've got to rally around them and teach them as much as they're capable of learning to strengthen them in all elements.
And Teresa, when we think about this idea of trust, it feels like the way it was embodied in Costco by the team members is very different, especially in the treatment of employees and the people element of the business, but also at a customer level. I wonder, what was the language that was used to measure that trust with customers? Obviously, there's a savings metric, but were there other types of metrics or other ways that you were able to measure the trust levels that had been built up over a period of time with customers?
Yeah, so when I was there, we read every day customer comments. So there's a comment box at the warehouses, which is the interface with the customer, and they're called members. They would put in their voice, write it down, put it in a box. Somebody would key it in to the system every night. There would be someone's responsibility, a closing manager. They might delegate it, and it would kick out a report that those who were impacted by those comments would read. Jim read them all. We read them too. And then we would take action on the actionable items. And if they left us a phone number and we wanted either more information or we wanted to let them know that we hear them and that we're taking action, we would call them. That was part of our daily duty to make sure they knew. And then what would happen is you would get the echo effect of that. And they would talk about it when they were gathering with friends at a coffee shop or a cocktail hour or going to someone's home or wherever it might be, PTA meeting. And we used to talk about that all the time, that we knew that our actions were being propagated and echoed by the voices of our members. And so we needed to be purposeful about what we were doing. So one thing that I always said to my vendors and that I taught my teams was, we are the gatekeepers for those members. Our negotiations and our leaning out the systems and our understanding all of the costs and all the fat and all the unnecessary fat that needs to get stripped out is our mission every day, to be a gatekeeper for our member who pays to shop with us and believes our promise that we're going to deliver high quality goods at the lowest possible price. And the lowest possible price is a continuum. It never ends.
And this idea of it being a continuum, because it strikes me during the recessionary period, you were almost handing more of that back. So you considered the relationship with the customer a very dynamic thing, that it wasn't just, hey, I have a customer, I have one pricing plan, let me go from there. Were there other ways within the customer base for you to get feedback that kind of almost touched on the value they were getting for that membership model over time? And in particular, I guess obviously the values are there, but it strikes me that as the tiers were established, there was a huge level of value being given to customers. And I guess is there any framing around that you had internally to measure kind of at what point are you giving more than you're getting, and then can you actually charge more to the members over time?
So I'm going to answer your last comment first and say no. And then I'm going to explain why no is the answer. So the buyers and their leadership spend about approximately 50% of the time traveling. And they go to the vendors' sites for manufacturing, farms, fields, whatever it might be. And this is all over the world. And so they want to see a couple of levers. One is, what's happening to the employees in those environments? Are they being treated well? And if they're not, then what can we put in place to help those site managers and the overall leadership understand why that's important, and that they're not only representing themselves, but they're representing Costco, and they're representing Costco's mores and norms, which are people first. And part of that is that, and is the environment not only an environment where you're honoring a human being, excuse me, but are you also creating a safe environment, which is part of honoring a human being, it's deeds and actions, right? But also environmentally, what are you doing? Are you in a textile shop where you're ensuring that every single needle is accounted for? Are you ensuring that there are no broken needles on the floor, on any work site area that somebody could be exposed to harm from that needle? That's just one example. There's so many. And so then through that, what are they doing for transportation? Are they moving goods 4 times and they don't need to be? So you're stripping out, you're helping them lean out their system and become more efficient. And so what you do, and there is a contract that is signed between the manufacturer and Costco that says you will continuously work to lean out your system. You will accept guidance from the buyer or the buying team to lean out your system, and everybody will share in those savings. So the vendor might get a penny, Costco might get a penny, back and forth, back and forth. If the vendor needs to invest in capital expenditures and you save 30 cents out of some part of the leaning system, that vendor might be able to save 20 cents and Costco gets 10 cents to put into the cost of goods to lower to the member, because the vendor is going to spend that money and it's calculated how much money will they earn to do that capital expenditure. Sometimes there's a time period where that 20 cents is given back to the vendor for leaning out their system until that capital expenditure is reached. Then they'll give back the other half. If it was 30 cents, now they'll keep 15. Costco gets another 5 cents. And because there's a margin cap for Costco buyers, they don't get to fatten their margin with that. They give it back to the member, unless there's a caveat to that. It's one of the items that they had already stripped out margin to give back to the member during a lean recession period, and everybody's coming out of a recession. Then the buyer might start to be able to keep 3 cents and give 2 cents, and so on and so forth. It's one size fits all, and it's not linear, and it's all based on circumstances in many elements of the entire value chain. Did we lose Paul?
Yeah, we did, but I'm very ready to jump in and just draw attention to the way in which this people first value, the way in which it permeated the culture, seems to have given you a pretty clear framework according to which to act and to take initiative.
Yes, very much.
And to be creative in service of the mission, I imagine.
So because, like I had talked about early on in our conversation, that the environment was teach, and people weren't released into promotion to then become teachers. You could teach where you were, of course, because it's an environment where people overhear one another's conversations. That's the way the whole office is set up. But also for you to have the authority to teach and propagate the mission, you would be recognized for your body of work and how you treated your employees and how you treated your vendors, because you have to respect your suppliers, right? And all of it, and respect and cultivate your people. And all of it is to be able to underpin the business and make it have substance. And so you can deliver back to the member, so the member feels that substance and recognizes intuitively the environment they're shopping in is different.
In terms of the temptation to cut corners and to, it's something that exists. It's endemic in any business environment. Trading a bit of the, taking a little from the long term, maybe trading off a bit of pain now for more pain later, all these behaviors that so commonly creep into business. What made it clear to you through your interactions with other team members that this just wasn't a place where that was acceptable? Or was it sometimes?
No, it was never. A couple of things. Jim always told stories about that temptation. And so there's two in particular. One is canonized on the wall at corporate. There's a huge art display with salmon and then water trickling down. And then in the middle of it is a story, and it's called the salmon story. And the salmon story is that the fresh foods buyers started with a fillet of salmon that had the skin on it, the fat back on it, the spine, and the pin bones in it, and sold it but it was high quality. They ensured that the salmon wasn't pumped with saline or other things to make weight. They ensured that it was good farming. They ensured all of the things that we talked about. The fishermen and the employees were treated well. And it's always as well as can be in those environments. And that doesn't mean you accept less. It means that you start from where they are and you grow better from there. And that was always understood. So then the buyer was able to get the skin removed and save X. I don't remember how much they saved, but saved X and lowered the cost per pound, even though the member is now paying for, in a ratio, more meat than all the other things in that fillet of salmon, because the skin has weight too, but now it's been removed and they were able to lower the cost. One of the things that is done in these supply chain initiatives is what can be done for the vendor with that salmon skin that will give them a revenue stream so they don't have more waste, and we're not just stripping costs out and then making them do whatever they need to do with the waste, and who cares what they need to do, because your vendor is your partner. So they make salmon skin treats for dogs. Figured that out. That industry didn't exist. So this whole thing is not part of the salmon story, but I'm going to tell you some of the deep weeds that are part of the salmon story that aren't like on this piece of art. So then go a little further down the path, they remove the spine, which is also weight. But now that's waste. But that can be ground down and turned into part of the omega-3, omega-6, and omega-9 supply chain. So find a pharmaceutical company, not farm as in salmon farm, but pharmaceutical farm, that would buy these raw materials, or maybe even dog food or cat food, and create a revenue stream there and lower the cost of goods, because that revenue stream is tied into this value chain. It's an entire value chain. Go down the path a little further, remove the pin bones. So now those pin bones can go in the same supply chain stream as that spine bone, because it's still bone is bone, right? So then go down the path a little further and remove the gray fat. That can definitely go into the pet food supply chain. So you're having these people that are in this linear industry that have caught fish, filleted them, taken the guts, heads, tails off, and sold them as fillets. They're now networking and potentially creating other industries and owning them themselves and having revenue streams, or putting these cutouts, is what they're called, into a barrel environment and selling them to those industries and creating revenue streams, whatever might be the manufacturer's choice. But you're the benefactor as a Costco buyer, helping them lean out their supply chain, creating revenue streams out of what would otherwise be waste, and getting a return on that investment of your time and the vendor's time, and delivering it back to the member. So now there's a clean fillet of salmon, and I don't know if you guys buy salmon from Costco, but we do, that is beautiful, 100% edible. There's no waste when I bring it home, and I'm paying less than I would had it still had the spine bone, the pin bones, the fat back, and the skin. Because of all of that work. Sounds simple. It takes a long time. This didn't happen overnight, but it's one of those things that is your mission. And you have to have a fire in your belly to want to lean out these supply chains. And that's just one of them. There's another one that's not nearly as sophisticated, but it represents a similar story in that a buyer was able to break into Calvin Klein jeans. And this is back when Calvin Klein jeans were like king of the jean world. And so Costco was able to buy and sell Calvin Klein jeans. They were selling them for approximately 60% of market value if you bought them retail. The buyer they were at first buying them on the gray market, and Calvin Klein said they would never sell directly to Costco. But they were moving so many jeans, Calvin Klein couldn't help but notice that truckloads upon truckloads were going to the gray market, and it was a growing business. And they want to know, where is this going? Well, when they finally were told it's going to Costco, then a meeting happened. And so they met with Calvin Klein, were able to start buying direct, cut the middleman out. So there's a reduction in cost. Would have been tempting for the buyer to keep that, but they knew the mission was to deliver that back to the member, so they did. And so then they continued to sell now directly from Calvin Klein through the warehouse to the member, continuously creating efficiencies and bringing the price down. I think they took over the couple of years, they took 3 or 4 cost decreases, which translated into sell decreases, which were all delivered back to the member. Jim talked about it in his presentations at the budget meeting and said, do you know how tempting it would have been to the buyer to keep some of that and pad their margin? Well, first of all, there's a margin report, and so it would have become visible. He said, but the buyer knew the mission was to deliver back to the member. And out of that mission in the continuous reduction of costs, the sales on these jeans and our overall clothing department has grown by X. Because people now, and then there becomes this intuitive understanding. You can get high quality, high brand name goods at Costco, and you know you're not getting ripped off. And so reputation was everything. And so you have to just continuously remember you're building your reputation as an agent for the company, within the company and in the industry, because people start to know your name when they know Costco's name and you arrive. And you're building Costco's name with all of the member base, because how many times have you shopped at a Costco and not even considered what the price is because you just know you're getting the best value at a high quality good because they're not stripping? So part of Costco's value equation is this: cost plus quality equals value. Because their tuna in a can under their brand name, if you open it, it looks like a fillet. It looks like you stuck a can in the side of a tuna and pulled out a fillet and then put a lid on it. That was higher cost than Starkist or other tuna brand names for a long time because the quality was exponentially higher. And there was just no way to deliver that on the scale that you would eventually get to when you were first starting out. So you have to demonstrate that you're showing quality based on what the goods actually cost and the comparison side to side to brand.
Teresa, you mentioned the principle teach, teach, teach. And I assume that these stories traveled through teaching, right? From you to your employees. And you also mentioned that there was a story, for example, painted on the wall. And what were other ways how people in the company, employees in the company, learned about these stories?
People talked about them. It echoed throughout the halls and the offices. Another way was, a couple ways, was there were mentorship programs There were one-on-one where somebody who wanted to grow their career at Costco was coupled with an executive, and that executive would carve out time to sit with the employee, dispense these stories and answer questions and talk, and then also give really germane advice on how the employee was managing their relationships with their peers, if they had people reporting to them, and with their leadership, teaching all of those elements of relationship building. That was one way. Another way was one of my mentors in that environment. Each mentor at the end of the mentorship session, which it was, X number of months long, needed to do a capstone project, and then they would present it to all of the executives that were mentors, all the mentors that had been assigned executives, and then other executive team members that would come to this day of presentations. My mentor during one of these seasons came up with this program to do a roundtable mentorship program, and it was looked at favorably. So I remained her mentor and helped her propagate that. It started very small, but eventually grew, and is now a mainstream roundtable mentorship program where you might have 2 or 3 mentors in the room, and you might have 8 to 10 mentees, and they basically pick their topics for the session period, and then they have to study the topics and come and present to the whole group. And so they learn leadership, presentation, and subject matter, and start to cultivate the confidence in those environments. In addition, someone such as myself was asked to present at the corporate headquarters to incoming, they're called inventory control specialists. It's the beginning stage of the buying environment. And they would be in a classroom setting where they'd be being taught the nuts and bolts of the system. And then I would come in and speak to them about these stories and the tenets of the company and why it mattered. And then I was also, when I traveled internationally, which I did frequently, I would be invited to those regional offices and give those presentations to the employees there so that they were included in hearing all the stories about Costco and where it came from and why it came from there and why we do what we do. Because that can get lost in translation. There is some expats that go over there to help start up those businesses, but there's also a lot of people who are hired out of the industries in those markets. And as we discussed earlier in our conversation, Costco is a completely different animal. So you're asking these adults in these positions, varying degrees of positions, to adopt new practices and keep what they learned from their other employers, but change and morph into the Costco way of doing things. And so I was tasked with going over and teaching those tenets. And so that's how that happens.
Devoted to teaching, would you say, on an average week?
It was every single thing. In fact, I still have employees today that will text me and say, I had this really complex problem and I was just spinning my wheels, and I had to sit down and take a deep breath. And they say, I just had to think to myself, what would Teresa tell me to do? What would Teresa do in this situation? And I had to hear your voice and see what you were trying to say to me. And I found my way through. And I would be, sometimes it brings tears to my eyes. And I'm like, that right there, that is exactly what everything meant.
If you were to stop a random employee in the corridor or on the shop floor throughout your tenure, do you feel they would be able to recite the code of ethics by heart? Was that ever considered weird or strange, or how would people reflect on that?
No, I don't think it was weird or strange, and I don't think it's something that people go around reciting every day like it's a cult. I think it's something that is one of those kind of tumbling within you, and it manifests into your actions, and it manifests into your speech and your conversations and your thought processes. I think they would have to pause to articulate it, because I believe it's something that just created such a form that it has a life of its own within a person.
Yeah, I mean, you'll see organizations with, sets of principles and values that are stated and circulated, but often not really lived.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds like in your experience that there was something dynamic in these principles that was alive to you. There was something about creative possibility as I listen to you and have learned from you about this experience you had.
Yes.
As opposed to just fulfilling some dictate from the top, right?
100%. And I would have to say that most of the coaching that happened, and coaching being, look, we need to talk about this kind of coaching, is because somebody has strayed from the goodness of the intent.
So that immune system was really alive for you in really nipping. Say more about that. Like, how would you nip it? How would you nip things in the bud? How would the culture encourage you to prevent low quality or lack of quality from coming into accepted norms of behavior?
I would talk about it. I just wouldn't shy away from those conversations that were paramount to the success of that person and the business. Let me give you this example. I had a troubled employee who had been doing their same job for a very long time, and they came to work for me, and unfortunately, I think some of their behavior had been addressed, but it just became exhausting. And so it was no longer addressed, and it was allowed to be. So I got them. I had fresh new eyes, and I'm pretty dogged about some things, and that the mission of behavior is one of them. And so after experiencing some of these behaviors, I went to my senior leadership and said, I really need to figure out how to get this person's behavior turned around. These are some of the things that have manifested that have just become ingrained. And so we sent this person off site to a leadership class series. Interestingly, and then I went to his graduation, and I don't know what was happening with leadership before. I don't believe when people behave badly that they want to behave badly. I just think they don't know. They haven't had somebody invest enough in them to get that behavior turned around. And they haven't had it made clear to them there will be consequences and the heat of those consequences if they don't get this turned around. But I'm going to give you an opportunity to get it turned around. And you need to understand this is an investment in time and money to help you do that, because it matters. It matters to me. It matters to the mission. It matters to you. So send them off site, go to these classes. I go to their graduation. They were surprised to see me at their graduation. And I asked why. And they said, well, I just thought this was like a step in a direction. And I said, yeah, this is a step in the direction of your success. That's the intent that we're doing here. So they felt safe enough to come to me after graduating and after this and thinking about it for some time and saying everything they taught me every week when I went, I heard your voice, and they were repeating the same things you had been telling me for the year that I've been working for you. And so I understand now it's not like you're against me. It's that you're for me and you're trying to teach me. And this person was a mature adult with children of their own that they had raised. And I'm thinking, I'm glad you're getting this now. This is so important to not only, because I knew it myself. Let me go back to like when I first felt Jim's presence. I was just 20 or 21 when I started with, I was actually 22 when I started with Costco, about to turn 23. And I was still quite young. And I came a family dynamic where we ate dinner every night at 6:00. We ate brunch every Sunday, but all the week during the day, both my parents worked. I was kind of a feral child. I was wild. And I didn't have a whole lot of structure. I didn't have all the things that I was about to learn when I started with Costco. And I credit Jim Sinegal and his principles to the cultivation of me becoming a good person and becoming a good parent and just becoming aware right from wrong and becoming principled. Truly, it was life-changing.
One thing we love about, listening to you and studying this company and Jim's leadership behavior is it ties to it relates to a very deep aspect of what we've come to understand as quality. And that is to say, it's taking a systems level perspective, looking at all the components of a given system and trying to align behavior with a win for every component of the system.
Yep.
And that's really come across in the stories you've shared. And I want to ask you, as we get to the concluding moments of our conversation today, and against the backdrop of this definition of quality that I've shared as behavior that's aligned with the flourishing of the whole system, what would you say is maybe among, or perhaps the highest quality experience you had in your 3 decades at Costco?
One thing that I would say, and this just occurred to me, is Jim's loyalty to people, Jim's loyalty to a person. We would tour with him. He would remember somebody's life story and some difficult situation they were in, and he would ensure that person was made available at that warehouse at that time that he was going to be there, because he wanted to sit down and share a hot dog with them and hear about how things were going. And he would carve out an extra 20 or 30 minutes of our trip. We would all mingle around, waiting at the front end for him to have this very personal conversation with this person who had this situation they had shared with him. And he was getting an update. And to see that and to know what he was doing, but you're not involved in the intimacy of the conversation, of course, but to know that he remembered that, he made a point to make sure he had a meeting with that person because he wanted to hear an update and he wanted to sit with them in person. And there were people too that he kept at the company doing what was considered as special projects for some extended period of time, because they had helped build fundamentally and foundationally the company. And he knew that being meaningful mattered to their life, and retirement wasn't what this person wanted. And so he kept these extra people on the payroll because the company could afford it. And he was basically investing in their humanity. And I know because I went through a very difficult time in my life. My brother died in 2003. And I left corporate and went back I actually left the company. They asked me not to leave the company, just take an extended leave. But I said, I cannot do that. I need to be fully present in my family situation. And I cannot feel the pull of the company that I love so much, that is truly part of my being. I must sever that tie and go be with my family. I will be back, but I must sever. And when I was ready, they came on a tour to that state, to that warehouse in 2005. And the warehouse manager called me and said, can you please come to the warehouse? The executives are coming and they want to see you. And so I went, and they were there, and there was hugs and all the things. And one of them peeled off and walked with me privately and said, we want to know when you're ready to come home. And I said, this is such perfect timing. I'm ready to come home. I want to stay here and be with my family over Christmas. So if I could stay here, because it was like November, and be with my family over Christmas, because this is going to be a really hard Christmas, I'd like to come home after the new year. And they said, okay, we want you home. And so they made that all happen. And I'm not the only one. I'm not like so special. They didn't do that for other people. They just knew me as a human being.
Yeah, that kind of behavior, it's a two-way street. It engenders a degree of loyalty on both parts that seems to allow for a creative, enriching experience for everyone.
Right? And why wouldn't you give your heart and soul and guts to a company that honored you as an entire human being? And how could you not manifest that in every employee that you led? Even when the employee doesn't understand why you're being so demanding of them. And that's one thing Jim said. It's not that I'm not going to demand a lot from you. You are going to have to perform. And I will demand this of you. But I will also, and show you how. And he did in everything. In fact, when I got promoted, we can't see each other, but I have this and I have framed it. And it's February 5th, 2016, and it's on his own letterhead, Jim Sinegal, and it says, Teresa, congratulations. I'm proud of you. Thanks for all you've done for the past 28 years to make our company a success, Jim. I was one of 200 and whatever thousand employees. And he personally wrote this and left it on my desk when I got promoted. And then I was subsequently chosen in 2018 as one of 10 people in the entire company to go to an executive leadership program, which is part of an MBA at Seattle University. One of 10 employees out of hundreds of thousand employees chosen to do that. They invested that. And I think that annually that program is like $56,000 because they wanted to shape me to be an even better. And the things I learned in that program are just so deep in the marrow of my bones.
Well, a question that we love to ask before ending each episode is what, and I think you've set us up for this with your last comment in terms of what is in your marrow and what you're doing today, and whether there's an ask you have from our audience as to any help that you might need today.
So when I resigned from Costco, I pivoted to owning my own company. I own 3 companies, but one in particular that I'll speak on. And it is a consulting company, and I help people with value chain. I basically use my acumen that I have cultivated and learned over my 32 years with Costco. And I'm for hire to help people with systems and not only leaning out value chains, but also your people systems. I'm not an HR person. I'm not into that legal portion. I'm into how do you want to humanize your leadership, to humanize your workforce, to get people to feel loyal to the mission, because you're going to get so much more out of them if you give that to them. And so, yes. And my site is www.lot68.com. Lot number no68.com. And that name is inspired too. And I won't spend time on that, but it's LOTNO68.com.
We will link that URL in the show notes.
Thank you.
Teresa, it has been a privilege to spend time with you today. On behalf of the Art of Quality team, we extend our very deepest gratitudes.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It means a lot to me, and thank you for letting me tell my story.
Thank you, Teresa.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure.
Thank you very much. It was really touching.
Oh, good.
Thank you for listening. And for more resources, please visit our website, theartofquality.co. If you think of anyone that could be a good fit for this format, please reach out via the website.